Thanks, Vladislav, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. You've sent us over like quite a detailed list of things to talk about. Obviously, we've got your book as well. But to sort of begin with, what I want to sort of talk to you about is freedom of speech in Britain, in the UK at the moment. What do you think the main concerns are, and where do you see it ending at the moment with free speech?
Well, I don't see it ending. I've lived in a country where there was no freedom of speech, the People's Republic of Bulgaria, which for all practical purposes was a part of the Soviet Union. It was just another Soviet province. So Britain is nowhere near there. But Britain recently has begun to move this way, in this direction. And I'm not saying that it will reach this point. I'm just saying that we in Britain are moving in this direction. The very fact that we are having this conversation right now shows that there is freedom of speech in Britain. But it's not the freedom of speech the Americans have. So let's keep this in mind. Or the freedom of speech the people in some Western Europe have, like the people in the Scandinavian countries. They have very robust rules about free speech. Still, the Americans are the best. They have the First Amendment, and the First Amendment is the best text in this respect I've read. I mean, of all the texts, the Universal Declaration, the French Declaration, the one they adopted after the revolution, the European Convention on Human Rights, the American First Amendment is the best because it's so simple and so unequivocal.
Yeah, that is definitely true. With a lot of their amendments are very well put together. What do you think the reason is why now? Because I know a year ago it wasn't really a big talking point. Freedom of speech and censorship in the UK. But why do you think today it's more of a talking point? Why is it a main concern of people in Britain today?
Well, it's obvious why, because there were these people were convicted. Some of these people should have been convicted, by the way. Obviously, violence, that's a criminal offense. Obviously, people who commit violent acts against policemen, against other people, they should be convicted. People who incite violence, incite any criminal activity, they should be convicted. But at the same time, some of these people who were convicted, they would have never been convicted in the United States, in a country with robust freedom of speech. I mean, when this is the thing, when people begin to be convicted for their opinions and not what they did physically, this is the Rubicon. And Britain is passing this Rubicon right now. But we can still stop it. We have plenty of opportunities. There are tens of millions of us. Don't despair.
How do you think we can pull this back so we're back on the right tracks and wherever people are in favour of freedom of speech? Because there are some people who can be blindsided by the media, and because they don't agree with what certain people are saying, they're happy for those people to be prosecuted, or they're happy for those people to be silenced. How do we convince those people that it's a problem for you as well? Just because it's not a problem for you today, it may be a problem for you 5 years down the line when the government do something that you disagree with.
We cannot convince those people because we are offering them nothing. We are offering them to stay alone at home, to be lonely and miserable, and to have no purpose in life. There are tens of millions of people over the Western world, maybe even hundreds of millions of people who are lonely, who have no children, no family, who have no purpose in life. And all these social engineering movements like wokeism, feminism, etc., they give them purpose. They give them a sense of belonging, community. And you don't belong in a community, say in a woke community, by saying that wokeism is bad. Obviously, you have to repeat the mantras, otherwise you will not fit in. So we cannot convince them because what we are offering them is just evidence, and evidence doesn't matter. Historically, evidence never mattered. People don't care about evidence. People follow their interest. They need physically to feel good because it affects their health. Whether they realize it or not, that doesn't matter. I mean, we don't realize I'm eating this food because I need nutrients, because my, say, calcium levels are low, and this is why I eat cheese, or I need vitamin K. It's just tasty. You need to eat it. You feel good when you eat it. And the same goes for how people decide whether to belong to a certain movement. So these movements offer them something. And we offer them nothing. So we will not be able to convince them. Let's not beat about the bush around the bush about that. It's not going to work. Never works in history. The only way for these people to come to our side is when they begin to feel the effects of what they're doing. But the question is when they will feel the effects. And here, in my book, when history had other plans, oops, that's the camera. For example, talk about the people of the Soviet Union, because at first they were not opposing the communists. They were indifferent. They thought that this doesn't concern them. Most of them didn't even know what socialism was. They didn't care. Most of them were peasants, actually. They were living in their villages. And in their villages, nothing changed in 1917, so they didn't care. They tilled the land. They were well. That was it. Their world ended with their village or their extended family. That was it. These were the Russians. And only later, when the collectivization began in the 30s, they realized what socialism actually is, because they felt it. It's not about, again, it's not about evidence, convincing conversations, everything that we do right now, talking. None of this ultimately changes anything. The situation changed for the Russians when they came to their villages. Armed people came to their villages and began to take away their possession, to kick them out of their houses, and to take the land away, and eventually to take them away to faraway places to die somewhere in the wilderness, in the Siberian wilderness. This is when their attitudes changed, when they began to resist. However, that happened in 1933. However, by that time, the socialism was well established in the Soviet Union. Secret police, concentration camps, well-organized army. People were disarmed. One of the things that all these leftist movements do is disarm the people. This is what Hitler did. This is what Lenin did. This is what Che Guevara did. All these people, they always do the same thing. And at this point, their resistance was already useless. There were around 7 million of them were starved to death, were murdered by starvation. And several more millions were sent to concentration camps where most of them died. So the question is when the resistance will begin. And also there was another peak of resistance during World War II. I have a chapter on this in the book. When the Soviet people rose against, they used the the chaos after the German invasion. The story is more complicated than that, but I don't want to stray from what I'm talking about right now. So they rose, and this was the second Soviet Civil War. It's in 1941. Why the Germans advanced so quickly? Because the Germans were had such a great army? No, not at all. Actually, the Red Army was way better armed than the German army. The German army was small and with obsolete weaponry. The Red Army had modern weapons and more of it, way more. But most Soviet citizens fought other Soviet citizens in 1941, not the Germans. So the Germans were filling a void mostly. This is how they reached Moscow. And this failed as well, as we know. So this is when, again, this is how people begin to resist when it comes to their ass.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I speak to a lot of peers about these kind of issues, and a lot of them say, well, it doesn't affect me, so why should I be bothered?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
People think that this doesn't affect them. They don't care. That's it.
But then they can't seem to comprehend that these issues don't affect you today, but it can affect you in 5 to 10 years' time if it carries on this trajectory.
Yeah, but that is what you say. And you're not Greta Thunberg or Kardashian. But even if you were, people mostly don't care about the Kardashians or Greta Thunberg. People care about what is their immediate life, what affects their day-to-day activity. That's it. So we can talk all we want, and we will. Of course, I love the sound of my own voice. At the same time, I know that all this talk is speaking to the choir, because only the people who are convinced of what I have to say will hear me. That's it.
Yeah, I guess it takes that people need to have a bit of long-term thinking to be able to understand what the outlook looks like in the future. But because we're got sort of like our phones, everyone's got a phone in their hand. Everyone's getting more and more short-term thinking, and they can only think a couple of days in the future, and that's it.
Well, people have always been like this before the phones existed, mobile or not. This is how people are. People don't make the decisions based on thick history books. They never did. That's it. Not to mention that history is much of what's written in many of these thick history books is bullshit. As it turns out, I give plenty of examples with sources in my own book.
You mentioned to us about British people who are keen to leave the European Court of Human Rights. Why are people keen to leave the European Court of Human Rights, and why do you feel like this is a mistake?
Because they have read neither the convention nor the case law of the convention. They just assume they know what the convention is about because they have heard something on social media of Farage making speeches. Don't get me wrong, I voted for Farage's party, but I voted not because I'm enchanted by him. Actually, I voted for him because he's the less evil. Farage said that with Brexit, the immigration will be solved. He got his Brexit, the immigration got worse. Now Farage tells us that leaving the convention will solve the issue. He's wrong again. But he is very good at speaking, so he will convince the people. And this will be shooting us in the foot. This is why we have chosen this. I'm still not used to the camera. This thing on the cover of the book, because humans are very good at shooting themselves in the foot. Most of the problems we face are self-created. We make artificial, unnecessary problems. And it's amazing that the conservatives now want to leave the convention, because leaving the convention is in the interest of the left. To begin with, the immigration problem could be solved without leaving the convention. Evidence: Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic. They all solved the problem. They are all within the convention. So clearly the convention is not a problem. So there is nothing to be gained by leaving the convention, but there is a lot to be lost. Because Britain, believe it or not, as much as it is a civilized country, and it is a civilized country, Britain is backwards in terms of law development. Britain still doesn't have a constitution. Don't believe these things you read about the British Constitution, because they tell you that this is some collection of precedents and customs, and this doesn't compute in my head. I've been trained as a lawyer on the continent. For me, a constitution is a document that's published and you could read it in plain English. That's it. Like the Constitution of the French Republic, the Constitution of the United States of America. Even the Constitution of Bulgaria has texts that are very good, that Britain would benefit from having. For example, there is one text that says that no ideology could be the official ideology of the government. We need this in Britain. But all we have in Britain is the European Convention of Human Rights. That's the closest we have to Bill of Rights. And Article 10 is our First Amendment. It's not as good as the First Amendment, but that's the best we have. Without it, we will have even less. I mean, I challenge somebody to quote some source, legal source in Britain, apart from the Article 10 and the case law on Article 10. And of course, the Human Rights Act, but it just repeats the same, the convention. Doesn't add anything. So we will shoot ourselves in the foot if we get rid of the convention, because the enemies of free speech will be able to encroach even more on our free speech. Now the government could still be limited by taking action before the European Court of Human Rights in some cases.
So what's Farage's argument for leaving?
Well, Farage, as far as I know, is not. He has no arguments. He has nice words, as usual. He's a politician. He is good at talking. There is no argument there. Because if you open the convention, you will see that there is nothing about people being allowed to break the law of the United Kingdom by entering illegally. There is no such thing in the convention. On the other hand, in the convention, there is good. Sorry, English is not my mother tongue. I'm struggling. There are rules that protect us, like Article 6, the right to a fair trial, and the case law. It's by the way, most of my cases before the European Court of Human Rights. I have won 4 cases. Unlike Farage, I have been there. I have actually had cases before the European Court of Human Rights. And unlike Farage, I'm legally trained. But of course, I cannot talk as well as Farage. Don't get me wrong again, I admire him. He is good at achieving results. What he achieved with the banks, for example, really impressed me. I mean, I have respect for the guy. He deserves respect. But at the same time, he is wrong about some certain things. And he's wrong about the convention. The convention, there is case law on the convention. I recently quoted it in one of my rants, which says that even offensive speech is protected, because if offensive speech begins to be prohibited, the free speech is over. And really, if the government is given the opportunity to say, oh, that's not allowed because it's offensive, now we no longer have free speech. So free speech is not something that is okay when you are okay with it. Because there will always be somebody who is not okay, or who is not okay with something being said.
Yeah, well, offence is subjective, isn't it? Like something could offend me, but not offend you.
Yes. And the European Court of Human Rights has recognized this in a number of cases, has said these exact words that even offensive speech is protected by the convention. And now, given all that, Farage says, let's leave the convention. Leaving the convention will not solve the immigration problem. And by the way, read those cases where the European Court of Human Rights was against immigrants sent to Rwanda. It has nothing to do with people being allowed willy-nilly to settle in Britain, breaking the law. No, it was about Rwanda. How safe is Rwanda? See, we are so what's the word, embroiled, not embroiled, entangled in our discussions here in Britain. Rwanda, this Rwanda thing goes on and on for years, went on and on for years, and everybody talks about Rwanda, and people inevitably begin to associate the convention with Rwanda. The convention has nothing to do with Rwanda. Why it has to be Rwanda? I mean, the Poles or the Hungarians, they're not using Rwanda. I mean, the European Court of Human Rights simply said, no, this is not the way for you to solve this issue. And by the way, they have valid points there. But there are other ways. There is more than one way to skin a cat.
How are Poland and Hungary solving the immigration crisis? Because it's happening all over Europe, right? But those countries have managed to prevent it.
Well, I cannot, I'm not the best person to explain it. I mean, there are plenty of documentaries, videos, articles. Everybody can Google it. It's not a secret how it was done. Very simple means. I mean, fences and changes in the legislation and other means. If there is a will, there is a way. It's not complicated. Again, without any Rwandas.
You would think, right? Like the UK is on an island. It should be one of the most difficult places for illegal immigrants to access.
Yes. I would think that. Because geographically, we're in a better position than Poland or Hungary or the Czech Republic. So if they can, and we are richer, still richer. I mean, if the trends continue, eventually, maybe in 20 years, Poland will overtake us because they're developing while we are sitting in one place and arguing, they're working. But we are still richer, and we are geographically in a better position. So if we cannot solve the problem, it's not because the problem is not solvable.
What's your thoughts on Keir Starmer? Because when Rishi was in power, it did seem as if things weren't going well, but on a much slower sort of pace. And then when Keir Starmer comes in, it just seems like all hell broke loose in a matter of weeks, really.
I'm sorry, I have no thoughts on Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is a politician. Politicians do generally, except for Margaret Thatcher. She had principles and balls. But the rest of the politicians, they simply do whatever will get them elected and keep them in power. It's like Yes Minister. I mean, what am I to think of Keir Starmer? Keir Starmer is just another character, that Yes Minister. And so is Rishi Sunak. I mean, everything is there. I have nothing to add. Just when people watch this series, they laugh. It's funny, but it's the reality. I mean, you could learn politics, you could learn political science by watching Yes Minister. That's it. Keir Starmer does what will keep him in power, obviously. He wants to be in power. He's a politician. He wants to get elected. So Keir Starmer will play his games, and Rishi Sunak played his games. And the rest, Boris Johnson played his games. It's a waste of time to discuss these people. But remember, we vote for them. I increasingly notice something unpleasant about my new compatriots, the British people. They increasingly begin, in some respect, to remind me of the Bulgarians. I was born in Bulgaria. Because the Bulgarians, and increasingly the Brits, always they never own the problems. They always complain that the politicians are bad, the establishment is bad, the journalists are bad, everybody is bad but us. Somehow we are blameless. No, it's a democracy. Who voted for Keir Starmer? Mostly he got elected by native Brits. Who voted for the rest? Britain is a democracy. The ordinary people are always to blame for what's going on in the country. And it's not just the voting, it's so many other things. But the voting is the easiest to explain because everybody can understand how you go vote and there are a certain number of votes and they lead to a certain number of members of parliament. This is easy. The other mechanisms are harder to trace, but there are other mechanisms as well. Ordinary people in every country, just like the ordinary Russians, are to blame for what's going on in Ukraine. And the ordinary Germans were to blame for what went on under Hitler. And the list goes on and on. Even in countries where there is no democracy, even in these countries, the ordinary people are to blame. The only blameless people for me are the people who have been invaded by an army. If your country is invaded, like the Eastern European countries were invaded in 1945 by one of the strongest armies in the world, if not the strongest, the Red Army. And it was they had no way of influencing anything in their countries, because whoever tried to talk simply disappeared, ended up in a mass grave or in a concentration camp. So I don't blame the East Europeans for this. I don't blame the North Korean for this because they were also invaded. But the West Europeans and the Americans and the Russians today, they're all to be blamed for what's going on.
So, coming from an ex-Soviet country, what is your, like, I've noticed in the UK there's a lot of, especially middle-class people calling for communism and being supporters of communism or Marxist theories. What is your message to those people?
Well, to begin with, there was never communism. Communism was an idea. Communism was something that was about to come in some bright future, we called it, bright future. Of course, nobody took it seriously, but we had to repeat those mantras. In the People's Republic, where I had the misfortune to be born in. So it was socialism. And this matters. We should stop calling it communism. We should call it with its real name, because to use the real name is to understand the problem. Problem is socialism. Socialism is government ownership of the means of production. That's it. No free market, no private property. That's what socialism is. And socialism existed in obviously the older socialist countries that were around the Soviet Union. And in Hitler's Germany, National Socialist Germany. So back to your question, what is my message? My message will be lost on them for the reasons I already stated at the beginning. Because they want to be this to be true. And why would they care what I have to say? I mean, what am I offering them? That there is no hope? That what they get is the best? They want to believe that there is something better. They also want to believe that they are working for this something better, that they're significant, that they are making history, that they are... Okay, maybe this will help to some of them. Bulgaria passed through it. My grandmother and my grandfather, they were leftists before Bulgaria was invaded by the Red Army. Years after that, I used to blame my grandmother. How could you work for these people? Because when they came to Bulgaria, they established socialism, and they murdered something like 220,000 people, according to Rommel, that by government. He's the authority on these things. Enormous numbers of people were murdered throughout Eastern Europe. This is how socialism is established. Never happens through convincing somebody. But when they murder a large number of people, the rest are cowards and into submission, and the rest begin to play the game. So I would blame my grandmother. How could you? And she was indignant that I could say something like this. She said it was never about murdering people. It was about being progressive. By the way, they used this word, progressive. And this word was used throughout my childhood, because we were always told that we are with the progressives, with the progressive all over the world. Because the progressive movement in the United States actually was one of the influences for socialism. They're of the same cloth. Is this the right expression in English? Same cloth?
Cut from the same cloth.
Sorry?
Cut from the same cloth.
Cut from the same cloth. Thank you. And she used to say, we watched Soviet movies and everybody was singing and everything was so nice, and we had these parties and we would gather together and talk about the future of humanity. And this is how by the way, she met my grandfather, who was an anarchist. They were also cut from the same cloth, at the time at least. So the young people were where the party was. And the young people today are where the party is. And the party is where the woke movement is. This is where there is the chanting, the happenings, people dressed in interesting clothes in Just Stop Oil, and they're significant because they can stop the traffic, and they're changing the world and all that. So this is what matters. Whatever I say, what am I offering them? A party? I'm inviting them to a party? No, I'm offering them nothing. Nothing but logic and facts. What are they to do with these facts? This is it. This is the sad reality.
Yeah, but it's especially that the logic and facts that you give them makes them somewhat depressed, because they feel like they've been living a lie. So instead of you actually giving them anything, you're making their lives feel worse.
Yes, you're spot on. Exactly. I'm actually offering them to bad health, because to be depressed is not healthy. So actually, you're spot on. I'm not offering them anything good, but I want to take away the good from them. I'm a Betty. That's it. That's it. And it's not a new thing. If you read Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, basically it's all there. I mean, of course, there is no socialism mentioned there, and none of this. But this sad realization that the more you know, the sadder you are, serves no purpose, get you nowhere.
Ignorance is bliss.
It is.
Well, and then when you're looking at companies like the World Economic Forum, who are saying you will own nothing and you'll be happy, it feels almost like they've turned socialism into a nice, cool, sexy brand, which everyone's looking at and thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna have this. I'm gonna have everything that I possibly want, and I'm not gonna feel it. It's not gonna feel. I'm gonna be able to afford it all. I'm gonna be able to have everything." And that's what everyone is like at the moment. Is they want as much as they can possibly get without actually doing anything to get it. So a lot of people are lazy at the moment, but they still want everything. They want brand new phones, brand new car, nice house, but they can't be bothered to get up and go and get it.
Yes, totally. I mean, they imagine naively, like all social interventionists throughout history. That's, by the way, older than socialism. For example, the protectionists from the 19th century imagined that this is how things work in the real world. you could change something and everything will be the same except the thing you changed. So, for example, how they imagine many people naively socialism in the West. So it will be the same, only the education and the healthcare will be free, and we will have other goodies. But not but the same, everything will be the same. And it turns out this is not how systems work, because when you tinker with something, something else changes. And there is even a science about this, complexity science. And they say, the complexity theorists, that in a system, you control nothing and affect everything. And that's a genius sentence. It requires many days to comprehend what this means. You affect everything, and yet you control nothing. Because this is always the problem with all these social movements, from socialism and Nazism to feminism and environmentalism. They always imagine that they could control something and they will not affect the rest. But it never works in this way. Take socialism, for example. It turns out socialism cannot be established without violence. Nobody has ever achieved this, historically. Yes, ideas, you could make something work in your head. You could make anything work in your head. But in the real world, it turns out people are not relinquishing their savings and their freedoms just like that. You have to compel them. And it turns out you cannot compel them with words. Every time it has been done through violence and murdering a large number of people and putting a large number in concentration camps and secret police and all that. This is how it has worked in the Soviet Union. This is how it worked also in Nazi Germany. This is how it worked in Cambodia under the Red Khmers, and in China, everywhere, in the People's Republics in Eastern Europe. So you imagine that the only thing that will change is that you will have more goodies from the government. But actually, the government gives by taking. It gives to you by taking from you. And there was this, I don't remember who said this. Was it Truman or somebody else? I actually quote it in the book, but I don't remember on top of my head who said this. A government big enough to give you everything is a government big enough to take everything from you. I'll repeat it. The government big enough to give you everything is a government big enough to take everything from you. And this is spot on. This is exactly how it works. Because you will get eventually some shitty free healthcare, like in the Soviet Union, and free education, which is riddled with propaganda. But at what cost? It's a package deal. It comes with concentration camps and state security snitches. It's a 1984 world. There is a price to pay. People always imagine naively that they could have something for nothing. No, there is always a price to pay. Thomas Sowell has put it in slightly different way. He says there are no solutions, there are just trade-offs. Same idea, by the way. And yet, when you watch all these talk shows, political talk shows on BBC with the public always says there are some political candidates in front, and the public everybody wants to speak his mind, because we live in times when everybody is convinced he has something to say. And they want to say, and what about this? Will we fix this? And these candidates, of course, they will say, yes, we have a program. We will allocate more money. We will change the legislation. We will fix everything. So the idea of the ordinary Brits, this is the problem, is that the government is the solution. They imagine that only if they could vote their way to prosperity, if only they elect the right politicians, it will be okay. No, it won't be.
That's a big problem, right? There's more and more people who are looking to the state to rely on them, and sort of like the state, they're looking at the state as if they're their parents and they're going to help them through tough times. But as a grown adult, you should take that responsibility on your own shoulders and look after you and your family. That should be your. So we mentioned before about a big subsection of people in the UK who are calling for socialism, and those people are putting all their hope in having a socialist system within the country because they feel like that's what's going to help them prosper in life. But instead, they should be focusing on themselves and putting things in place where they don't need to rely on anybody other than and look after their family, and that should be their meaning in life.
Yeah, but why should they?
In my early 20s, I didn't understand what like the meaning of life was. I always thought like you go to work, you go out on the weekends, and then you go back to work again. I was thinking like, what's the point? And then I met my partner and we got married, and now I think my purpose in my life is to look after her, and then when we have our children, to look after my children. So now I've got a meaning in the sense everything I do every day is to make myself better so I can be a better husband and better father.
So to begin with, you have children and a family.
I don't have children yet, but future children, I'm already preparing myself for it.
But what about these people who have no family and no children, who's, like I started with this, whose families, they're, say, Just Stop Oil group, local group?
They've got no life purpose.
So what about them? Why should they face reality?
So if these people actually face reality, and it's difficult at first, but they get through 1 year, 2 years, and then they can start implementing the foundations, the building blocks to then look after themselves and prosper in life from their own individuality and not from relying on politicians or the state to pull them out of their problems.
Well, that's like the conversation about losing weight. Yes, it feels bad at first to be hungry and to be in the gym, but a few years down the road, you will feel better and you will be grateful. Well, the fact is, the world is full of fat people. So apparently they don't want to do something for this a few years later. They want to eat here and now, and they don't want to be bothered with going to the gym.
Yeah, because of the dopamine that they get from eating sweets or chocolate. Instant dopamine hit rather than going to the gym and having your dopamine hit weeks later down the line.
See the difference? Just Stop Oil, for example, or Insulate Britain or whatever of these PR projects, because they're PR projects. They have nothing to do with the environment. They will never solve anything. They offer a feel-good activity right now, and you are offering them something a few years down the road. So
yeah. But yeah, it's hard to convince, but because like you only start seeing the benefits are so much more worthwhile because you've had to sacrifice to get those benefits, and you've sacrificed 2 to 3 years of your time to get those, to start reaping any reward. That reward feels so much sweeter than if I got a small reward right now and just kept getting those little rewards every day.
Okay, I agree with you, but it's me who agrees with you. And the world is still full of fat people who don't want to be bothered.
What do you think it's just human nature for us to sort of try and take the easy path all the time rather than to take the path of...
Oh, yes, it is. It is. It has been theorized that because humans evolved, that's outside of my area of expertise here. I'm just regurgitating something I have read. So I cannot vouch for it. But it has been theorized that because humans died so young most of the time throughout human history, they were in a hurry to live to the full. So eat your dessert first. Life is uncertain. Never plan for a few years because you may not be around a few years down the road. For most of human history, people could not be certain that they will live until a few months down the road, let alone a few years.
Okay, that's interesting.
So our brains are wired to want here and now.
Yeah, just be quick and fast
Mhm.
and enjoy your yeah, with your book, you talked about well, you discussed in it about how planning often backfires.
Not
Um,
often, always.
always.
Planning of the society. I mean, planning in when it comes to constructing a railroad bridge. No, it doesn't backfire. The railroad bridges stand. But when it comes to planning the society, it always fails, always makes things better. Oh, well, sorry, worse. Always makes things worse. I mean, we call the book When History Had Other Plans, but it turns out history always has other plans.
Why is it that planning a society fails? Where does it go wrong mainly?
Well, consider this. Thomas Edison, in order to make the light bulb work, had to conduct thousands of experiments, 3,000, if I remember correctly. So he failed 3,000 times in order to, to succeed once eventually. With society, you could never do it for 3,000, assuming it could be done. I mean, the light bulb is possible to begin with, certain things are impossible. But even if all this, sorry, all that the social engineers promise us is possible, it takes a lot of experimentation to make it work. And we don't have enough humans for that on Earth, even if it was possible. I mean, you cannot create the Soviet Union, say, 200 times in a row, tinkering with different factors here and there in order to make it work, even if it's possible to work. Because we will run out of humans. I mean, the Soviet Union exterminated something like 62 million people. So make the calculations and you will see that humanity is not large enough to conduct the experiment, say, 200 times. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but everybody can make the calculation. And the same goes for National Socialism. The National Socialists exterminated something like 21 million people, according again to Rummel. I'm always quoting Rummel, the American professor Rudolf Rummel, because he is the accepted authority on genocide. So, which means that because development is trial and error, and every time social engineering is attempted, it's always for the first time, because the idea has to be new and enticing. So it's first time, and the chances are even if there is some merit in this idea, it will not work because nothing works. Again, this is why I started with the 3,000 light bulbs that didn't work. So this is the difference between engineering and social engineering. With real engineering, like when you design a railroad bridge, you can experiment with steel. You can experiment with different steel profiles. You could see when things fail in a laboratory, depending on corrosion, temperature, type of welding rods you're using, you name it. You cannot do these experiments with tens of millions of people. That's it. And the social engineering, my definition of social engineering is the arrogant idea that you could design human society the way you design a railroad bridge. Never works. It didn't work with socialism. It didn't work with Nazism. It doesn't work with environmentalism. The CO2 emissions continue to rise. Now because what they do is not about lowering the CO2 emissions. It's about political gains. They're playing political games. They didn't work with the aid for Africa. Africa became poorer because it received too much aid. There are already plenty of serious, credible sources on the subject. I quote some of them. Actually, the latest one by Dambisa Moyo, they didn't pay attention to the previous one because the previous one could easily be dismissed. Oh, these right-wing theoreticians. And she said Africa is mostly poor because it receives too much aid. And because she first of all, she's an African, and also she worked in high profile jobs in some institutions. I don't remember, World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, whatever. You could read her bio, and they began to pay attention. She was not even the first. So foreign aid doesn't work. The efforts to curb the spread of nuclear weapons backfired. Now we are witnessing the latest spectacular backfiring of this in Ukraine. Ukraine gave up its nukes for promises for security. So it turns out that having nukes is more important than international treaties. I'm referring to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. So if we have to summarize it, the efforts to curb the spread of nuclear weapons, to limit nuclear weapons, lead to increasing the spread of nuclear weapons, because everybody all over the world now is taking notes what's going on in Ukraine. And the moral of the story so far is that having nukes is better than not having nukes. And even Putin said that. I quote him as well. Yeah, that's this during some conference, somebody was saying, this day and age, the international community can guarantee peace and stability and blah, 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 all these blah, blah, blah things. And Putin just dryly remarked, well, this is what Saddam Hussein used to think. And the same goes for so many other things. I mean, we included 12 stories in the book, but it could easily have been 24 stories. We just opted out of some stories because they are too well known. We have nothing new to say, like the prohibition in the United States. It was meant to lower the crime. It led to increasing the crime, to Al Capone, the likes of Al Capone. Every time it backfires, every time. Take the political correctness. It was meant to protect the vulnerable. And it led to a widespread abuse of the most vulnerable people, children. To rape on an industrial scale, as the Prime Minister of Britain called it. Cameron, was it Cameron who said this?
Yeah, David Cameron, I think so. I don't know.
But every time these reports about the number of the children who have been raped puts the number higher and higher. The latest report I read was for 19,000 children raped. So this is the price of political correctness. This is how you protect the vulnerable, by being politically correct. And the efforts to I already said about the nuclear weapons, but there is more, because Russia was under sanctions between 2014 and 2022 when it invaded Ukraine openly. And these sanctions actually encouraged Russia to invade. But the sanctions were meant to discourage Russia. And it starts with World War I. World War I. What was World War I? According to the propaganda, it was the war to end all wars, and the war that will make the world safe for democracy. Now, that may not have been the real reason, but what it actually achieved, it achieved the opposite. Democracy was almost extinguished. It achieved the rise of socialism in the Soviet Union and of Nazism in National Socialist Germany, two totalitarian countries with zero democracy. Or take World War II. With the British war guarantee to Poland, it was meant to discourage, to prevent the war, to discourage Hitler. Actually, it achieved the opposite. Or take Stalin's preparations for the war. It turns out that the Soviet Union so spectacularly lost the war, and almost lost the war, period, in 1941, because it was prepared too well. Now, this doesn't compute when people hear it. This doesn't make sense. But when you go into the details, actually it does. Because this staggering advantage in terms of technology, industrial might, weaponry that the Soviet Union enjoyed was achieved at the expense of the Soviet people. And they hated their own government. and when Hitler invaded, they wanted to fight on the side of the Germans against their own government. The Red Army disintegrated because the Soviet people were driven to cannibalism. Literally. I mean, in one of the chapters, I quote some of the things that happened. I mean, it's a horror movie, like you describe a horror movie. Children eating other children. Stuff like that. Human meat being traded under the counter. But by the way, this is not new info. I quote, for example, sources from the Robert Conquest book and other sources that have been published decades ago, but somehow none of this filters through. How people ignore this. And it's not like these are obscure sources. Robert Conquest is a very famous author.
So you've got a chapter in a book called Hitler Ended Racism.
Yeah, this is one of the most weird stories, because Hitler was a rabid racist, and Hitler wanted to establish, among other things, a society based on racism. So how the hell he achieved the exact opposite? Well, because it's very simple, the explanation is very simple. Because racism was mainstream prior to Hitler adopting it. Racism was something normal. Today, racism is a dirty word. Why? Because of Hitler. Hitler changed all that. During the war, the shift began in the United States during the war, because racism was no longer acceptable if Hitler was a racist. And this is how all this movement started and culminated later on in the civil rights movement, and eventually in the change of the legislation throughout the Western nations. We quote all these changes. And the argument was always the same. Hitler. It can't be good if Hitler was a racist. Racism can't be good. So paradoxically and weirdly, the political legacy of Hitler is the exact opposite of what he wanted. It's multiculturalism and widespread immigration. Well, I don't know whether he was the greatest racist, but he was one of the most famous racists in history. And here's what he achieved. And by the way, we also quote in the book that his National Socialism, because now it's viewed as something uniquely evil, because of all these Hollywood people, unfortunately, learn their history from Hollywood movies. But actually, it was Nazism was a hodgepodge of everything that was trendy at the time, and racism was one of the trendy things. Just like socialism was trendy. So he adopted socialism, he adopted racism, he adopted nationalism, he adopted other things. Even the symbols he used, even for example, the sign over Auschwitz, work will set you free. Even this was not something the Nazis came with. It was stolen from the Soviet Union. They had this sign on top of some concentration camps. All concentration camps idea was taken from the Soviet Union. The secret police, many other things.
Okay, so he took quite a few popular ideologies and mushed them into one to then become attractive to the mass population.
Yes, there is nothing original in Nazism. It's just, like I said, a hodgepodge of what was trendy at the time.
I don't know if you can say this on YouTube, but you could compare it a little bit to like the woke movement and how that's taken a lot of popular ideologies and mushed it into one.
Well, all social engineering movements have similarities, and in particular, there are similarities between National Socialism and today's woke. So let's mention some of them. Playing the victim card. intimidating political opponents in the street, shouting down speakers, the cancel culture, and most interestingly of all, racism. This is something else that the woke and the National Socialism share. And when people hear that, they're just shocked. They think, because they're cultured, they're civilized, they wouldn't say what they think, but I bet they think you're talking gibberish. This cannot be true, because they're against racism. This is the whole point of woke. But not when you look at the facts, not at the statements, because they separate people between based on the color of their skin, not the content of their character. They believe that certain people are virtuous and victims because of the color of their skin, and other people are oppressors and privileged because of the color of their skin. That's racism 101.
It's a definition of racism, right?
It's the definition. Dr. Martin Luther King gave the best definition of racism I've ever heard, because it's so short and eloquent and fits everything. Judging somebody by the color of his skin and not by the content of his character. So by the race, not by the individuality. And this is exactly what the woke preach. It's race. And cancel culture, the Nazis used to practice cancel culture. Because remember, people always associate Nazism with what happened when Hitler was in power. But Hitler came in power in 1933. And before that, the Nazism was another social justice movement. So they were shouting down opponents. They were intimidating, like I said, political opponents in the streets. Well, arguably they were more violent than Antifa is today. But it's a quantitative difference, not a qualitative difference. So yeah, you could see, and you could draw many parallels between many of these. Environmentalism, weirdly, another social engineering movement, because it's about social engineering. It's not about engineering in the environment. If it was about the environment, they would care really about CO2 emissions, and they would be pro-nuclear, but they're against nuclear. And this tells us something about the real goals. The real goals here are not to change the environment. The real goals are to change the human society, to have leverage, to tell the humans how they live, what they eat, how they travel, where they live, and all that, to be in power. All these social movements, they're always about power. They're these two components. So they're the frustrated people, the foot soldiers. The communists used to call them useful idiots. And they're the careerists, those who make a career out of it. People like Lenin, like Hitler, like Stalin, like Trotsky, like Mao, for whom the puppet masters, the masterminds. So the useful idiots, for them, it's a feel-good activity. They just feel good to participate, at least at first. But for the others, it's a career. And we see this today in the modern woke movement, because they're foot soldiers. They're people who are in the streets and who like to have an excuse to shout at opponents and to feel significant and to vent their feelings. They would do it without money. They're not paid. And then there are those who are actually paid well. I don't remember what there was a study what is the size of the woke industrial complex in the United States. All these compliance officers, I don't remember them. They have different names in different corporations, but these are people who receive actually wages for vetting texts They have them in Hollywood, they have them in big corporations so that nobody gets offended, for example, and other things. And they typically come with social sciences degrees.
There's a lot of the DEI people.
Yes, yes. And it turns out actually it's a sizable part of the economy already in the Western world. It's not negligible. I mean, I don't remember the numbers, you could Google it, but the studies show that it runs into billions of dollars per year. So again, we have these two components, useful idiots and careerists. All social movements are like this.
Can you see society pushing back on the woke movement? I've noticed over the past couple of years, or past year especially, there's been a bit of pushback against the woke movement.
Well, I can see that the moods are changing and more people are noticing what's going on. I can read the comments below videos like the one we are making right now. But this is not pushing back. I mean, I come from Bulgaria, a country where everybody talks the talk, but nobody walks the walk. So eventually, this alone will not do the trick.
If I look at it from like a financial aspect, I notice companies like Disney are struggling because they've pushed these narratives in their movies, and none of the movies are hitting the numbers that they used to.
I don't know. Yes, I've watched some of these critical drinker videos. But Disney is still a very large, very wealthy corporation. I don't know. We'll see.
So what kind of pushback would you expect, or would you consider as a serious pushback?
I don't know. I've been wrong again and again whenever I try to predict the future. I got some things wrong, but then I was spectacularly wrong about other things. I remember arguing with my uncle at the beginning of November 1989, what will happen with the socialism in Bulgaria. That was at the time when the Berlin Wall already was falling, and the Velvet Revolution was going on in Czechoslovakia, and he was saying, well, it will happen over here. By over here, he meant the People's Republic of Bulgaria, of course, because it's a wave, cannot stay insulated. And I was saying, no, we are different. They're freedom-loving people. These East Europeans. You see, in the West, people talk of East Europeans as there is such a thing. I mean, there is different East Europeans as the Brits are from other West Europeans. Say the Brits are different from the Italians. I mean, the Bulgarians and the Romanians on one side, and the Poles and the Hungarians on the other, are very different people. Anyway, so I was making this argument. They love freedom. They're in the streets. We are here afraid. There were just a few of us who were trying to do something very carefully because we were scared. And he was saying, no, it will happen over here. And guess what? I was wrong. But the spectacular thing, because the local dictator, Todor Zhivkov, was toppled just a few days later, on 9th of November. And the process began in Bulgaria as well. Yet I was convinced that it will not happen a few days before it did happen. And of course, I was in the thick of it. I knew the moods. I knew that nobody liked socialism. Socialism was totally unpopular. Nobody took any of this idiotic ideology seriously. I mean, socialism is taken seriously in the West. Us who lived under socialism, we don't take it seriously. Because we know what it is in reality. And yet, I was wrong. And I was wrong recently again, when there was this talk in 2022 whether Putin will invade. And even in the first draft of the book, I wrote something along those lines, because the book was written at the time already. And I wrote that Putin needs some new intervention, some new stunts, because I was analyzing how his popularity is falling, how the Russians demand another victory, like Crimea. So I was predicting correctly, as it turned out, that there will be another intervention because he needs another popular war. But at the same time, I was wrong who he will invade. So I was thinking he cannot possibly invade a NATO country because NATO is too strong. He cannot possibly fight, say, the Chinese because they are too strong. So he needs a weak opponent. But even Ukraine these days is not as weak as it used to be in 1914. So it will not give him the opportunity of a quick and successful war. So my money was that he will invade again, say, Georgia, something. Some of the former Soviet republics, but not Ukraine. And I was taken aback, totally stunned when he invaded Ukraine. So I'm not good at making predictions. By the way, nobody is. There is a brilliant book I recommend by Nassim Taleb, Black Swan, on this subject. He has captured everything perfectly well there. We don't know what will happen. But here's what I can tell you if history is any guidance. With all these social movements, there are two stages. The first stage is the romantic stage, or if you could call it a comedy. When things are fun or maybe even laughable, but it's still a comedy, still a circus. Eventually, the comedy is over and the tragedy begins. This is how it used to be with socialism, with Nazism, with many other of these movements. It was fun at first. It was a feel-good activity. Eventually, the fun was over and the tragedy began. So if we go down this rabbit hole, eventually the fun, this comedic part in which we are today, this circus you're witnessing, this will be over. And the tragedy.
And then reality will hit.
Yes. So the people, for example, in Nazi Germany, they remember how they, when Hitler came to power, how they were singing songs, how they were idealistic. Nobody, or very few people maybe, imagined what actually is going to happen. They didn't think, again, just like my grandmother, concentration camps, and they think of revival of. They couldn't possibly picture Germany in 1945. The country was razed to the ground. A big part of the population, maybe 10%, I don't remember. Just the soldiers that died were around 8 million, not to mention the civilians. So maybe 10 million out of what Germany was at the time. I don't know, 70 million or less. I don't remember these numbers. You could check them. So a big chunk of the population dead, and the rest destitute, starving, dying of infectious diseases, or raped. Millions of German women were also raped. This was the end of Nazism. This is the tragedy stage. In the Soviet Union, at first, you read 10 Days That Changed the World by what was this lefty American journalist Reed. He was later buried in the Kremlin wall. That was the fun part, the beginning. And eventually, it was the mass murder, the extermination of tens of millions of people, and this 1984 reality, grim reality, 70 years. And all these nations that were under socialism, they will never be the same. They're crippled.
Even the socialism that was around then didn't have the same technology as we have today with the devices and all this stuff. So imagine a socialism in the West with the phones, the social media, YouTube, all of this technology that we've got. I don't think the Because you're talking about it as if it had a slight utopia stage and then it went in decline and reality hit and everything went crazy. I don't think the utopia stage would last near as long in the Western world if socialism was in full force, just because of how interconnected we all are and how often people share their opinions online.
Well, we don't need to imagine it. I mean, it's going on in China. It's not something new. It's just the technology that's new. Usually, before the technology was there, they used to use collaborators, state security collaborators, snitches. Today, they have different means. But even under Stalin, they were already wiretapping. Wiretapping? Is this the expression? Wiretapping many people, recording them. So even at the time, the technology was already emerging. And yes, now with this technology, it's much worse because the government could listen to, the government could be everywhere. And it will be cheaper,
Cheaper and easier, yeah.
cheaper and easier. The Westerners naively think that certain things are guaranteed. This cannot happen here. This is what so many nations thought. The Russians thought this before socialism, that these things are impossible. Everything's possible, unfortunately. There's this beautiful book that got the Nobel Prize, The Lord of the Flies, which was inspired by the history of Nazism, but it's applicable to socialism as well. By the way, Nazism was a form of socialism. You remember this book, Lord of the Flies?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read it. I'm pretty sure you read it. We read it in school.
Yeah, nothing is guaranteed. The civilization is a thin veneer on top of horrible things, and it's very easy under certain circumstances everything to collapse. And I'm thinking of this when I saw, for example, in the United States, this horrible and shameful video footage of people tearing down statues. I mean, it's around the corner if the conditions are right.
In Russia, how quickly did it go from this could never happen in Russia to it happening?
Well, Russia, it turns out, was a very civilized country prior to 1917. This comes as a surprise to many people because they always think that Russia was this despotic backward country. Actually, in the book, we give plenty of examples of the opposite. For example, during World War I, Britain and France, the two most civilized democracies, they were shooting soldiers who didn't want to fight at the front, while the Russian Empire was punishing these soldiers by sending them to the rear. And this is, by the way, how eventually the revolution happens, because these soldiers were sent in the capital of all places. And eventually they were in danger of being sent to the front again, and they revolted. This is how it started. It was not because the Russians were poor or there was serfdom. Serfdom was abrogated roughly at the time, abolished. Roughly at the time the slavery in the United States was abolished, yet nobody says that the United States was a backward country. So these soldiers, so it turns out paradoxically that Russia was too civilized and too liberal, and this is why it crumbled. Because when somebody is mutinous and uses violence to subvert the existing order, the first thing you do is to arrest him and either put him in jail or execute him. But this is not what they were doing in Russia. And this is why the fire spread and Russia crumbled. and the consequences are still with us today. I mean, even North Korea and China today are consequences of what happened in Russia in 1917. So again, nothing is guaranteed. Nothing. There was. I don't remember who said this. Was it Reagan who said that we are only a generation only a generation away from losing our freedom or something? I don't remember the exact quote, but it's spot on. Nothing is guaranteed. This is the bottom line. It requires constant vigilance to keep the existing order, and things cannot be prevented from happening, bad things, just because we believe they cannot happen. We don't know what can happen. Our imagination is too limited.
Reagan said freedom is a fragile thing and is never more than one generation away from extinction.
Yes, thank you. Exactly.
Yeah.
This quote, yes.
That's very true. When these leaders came into power, do you believe they set out with good intentions, and as it sort of transpired out, everything went wrong that could go wrong, and then it ended up being sort of like a doomsday?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been in the head of Lenin or Hitler. But ultimately, this is irrelevant because it's not about them. It's about the whole situation in the country. I mean, if Russia was a normal country in 1917 and Germany in 1933, neither Lenin nor Hitler would have come to power. Ultimately, it was not Lenin and Hitler. It was the Russians and the Germans. And ultimately, today, just like today, it's not about who is in power in what Western country. These are just details. These are just consequences. Ultimately, it's about the ordinary people, us, the majority of those who live in a particular country. They matter, and they matter even if they do nothing. When they do something, they matter, and when they do nothing, they still matter. They always matter.
But then at the same time, it is hard to blame the people that are oblivious to it, right? Because of the amount of propaganda in TV, on the news. The news is crazy. TV, movies, there's propaganda everywhere. And if you're not someone that can possibly even think a little bit further ahead, then it's so easy to become brainwashed into what they think is right and what they think is wrong.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Everybody goes with the flow. People are engaged with their everyday lives. They don't have the time or the inclination to think too deeply, to study everything. But under this logic, if we get this logic to extreme, we could say that nobody is to blame for socialism or Nazism. So tens of millions of people, actually, according to Ramal, the number is about over 160 million people in debt by government and other sources. And so there are tens of millions of people dead, but nobody is to blame. Well, actually, there is somebody to blame. There was this very good essay by Václav Havel, who wrote about how socialism worked. He was writing about the socialism in Czechoslovakia, but when I read it, I had the feeling I'm reading about the People's Republic of Bulgaria. Same thing. And he exactly makes this point that ultimately everybody is to blame because everybody participates in all this. Everybody, even by going with the flow because it's easy, that everybody does what's easy. And this is how these things happen.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be to stick his head out, to stick out to.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Nobody wants to put like the neck on the line and be seen as the black sheep in
yes,
society.
Yes. But this But this is exactly why this instinct of self-preservation is that allows this to happen. So by doing what's safe for us, we are causing this. Because ultimately it's the people, even in totalitarian countries. Take, for example, how the concentration camps worked in the Soviet Union. There was one guard maybe per, I don't remember the exact, I quote the number in the book, but I don't remember it on top of my head, but maybe one in guarding 1,000 people. How could one guard 1,000 people? Well, very simple, because the prisoners were mostly guarding themselves. And I've been in this system when I was drafted in the army. Who was guarding the soldiers that were arrested, for example? It was other soldiers. Ultimately, and then who are these snitches? Who are the party members? These are ordinary people. These are not professionals who are on payroll of the state. They're milkmaids, they're turners, they're teachers, they're all sorts of people who have their daily jobs. They cooperate. Ultimately, it's the ordinary people. And who are the people who even get on top, who make a career? Except for North Korea, that became a monarchy, and ordinary people cannot rise to the very top because it's hereditary. But apart from this, the other socialist country, it was ordinary people that were manning the state, and they were making careers. Everywhere you see, Václav Havel was spot on. It's the ordinary people who are to blame. They participate. Without them participating, this will crumble in a day.
So what can be done? What do you think can be done to the majority of people that are still sleeping and are not thinking about what's about to happen? Because like you said at the beginning, we're having this conversation, but this like it would come up on your algorithm if you're interested in this stuff. These people that aren't interested, it won't come up in the algorithm. They're not going to go out looking for this sort of content. So they're not actually going to hear us talking. So what can be done to those people to understand before it gets too late?
Nothing. They want to watch TikTok videos. Nothing could be done.
Do you think it's perhaps a parent's responsibility to teach the children how important our freedoms are?
Well, actually, I don't know. I'm not a parent myself, but I cannot imagine why it is your responsibility to teach your kids to stick his neck out and to make his life difficult.
Yeah, that's the part where it gets a bit sticky, right? Is like we said earlier, ignorance is bliss, and there are times when I think, or even I observe someone that doesn't know anything about all the stuff that we're looking into, and I just look at them and think their naivety is actually looks quite good. It's quite envious that they just crack on with their lives and don't think about anything. But then at the same time, you feel a little bit sorry for them as well.
See, the very question you're asking, what can be done, is a social engineering question. What shall we do in order to make the society better? Well, my answer is we cannot make society better. My answer is every time society gets worse when you try to improve it. So that doesn't mean that I'm just sitting back and doing nothing. I'm trying to even with this book, I'm trying to draw parallels to show that where things might go, because history actually has plenty to teach us. I mean, as a lawyer, I was never satisfied to read the law. I always went to the length of reading the case law, because the law is theory. And as one of my professors used to say, when you study the law, it sounds like a chick novel, like a romantic story. When you begin to practice it, it looks like a porn movie. And he was spot on. This is how the law works. And this is why you need to read the case law, because what is the case law? The case law is the history. What actually happened with when the law met reality, when this law had to be applied in real life. And this is my role as writing a book on history. It's like case law of sorts. So it's not that I'm advocating do nothing, just wait and see. I'm doing something, but at the same time, I have no illusions that we cannot engineer society. We can, but we can be skeptical. This is why the religious people are actually so beneficial to any society, because they're naturally conservative. I remember to this day one documentary on Afghanistan, on the war of the Soviets in Afghanistan, and I'm not a fan of Islam, but I have great respect of for this for the Afghani people, how they fought, and they were motivated by religion. And this guy, I remember, he was saying something that is very close to me. He was saying, God has made the world to be with poor people and rich people. And who are the commies to change the world, to decide that there will no longer be rich and poor? Who are the commies to change the world that is created by God? This is what he meant. And this is spot on. I mean, we should be skeptical about any idea of improving the world, any social engineering movement, because we know from history they're all bad. They fail every time. They always make things worse. History always has other plans. So this is the thing that we can do. So talking from this point of view, talking is not useless. Although we will not convert the people who want to watch TikTok, at least not for now. But we could still keep this idea that we should be skeptical. This is the essence of conservatism.
Do you believe that society goes in cycles, as in it has its periods where everything's on the rise, and then it has its periods where everything comes down, for then the new generations to learn to then rebuild again?
Not necessarily. History shows that society is all over the place. It goes everywhere. It goes sideways. It goes in circles. It goes linearly. I mean, nothing is guaranteed. We all want to have some clear-cut, simple idea that explains it all. We don't. We never will, probably. It's way more complicated. And this is why, by the way, the social engineering movements fail, because they inherently needs a very simple idea that explains the world. Take, for example, socialism. What's the explanation of the world? Well, there's this struggle between the rich and the poor throughout history. I was raised on this propaganda. We were taught that history for us was nothing but this struggle between exploiters and exploited. And eventually, so this is how it was under slavery, and then under feudalism, and then capitalism came, and eventually, fortunately, the scientific socialism emerged, and the exploited found a way to fight back, and blah, blah, blah. This is a very simplistic idea. It has to be simplistic because you cannot have followers with complicated ideas. I mean, for example, take what I'm saying in your video right now. This doesn't bring following, because nobody will feel good by knowing that he doesn't know the world. People want to be convinced that they're clever. They know the world, and for this you need to give them simple explanation, like Hitler. Hitler was giving the Germans a very simple explanation. We are not to blame for World War I. We were treated unfairly. And who is to blame? Well, it's never you, the ordinary Germans. No, it's the Jews, and it's the French, and it's these capitalists in London, and all that. And this is what people want to hear. This simplistic, it doesn't matter what is true. It feels good to be true. It felt good for them. And this is what modern, well, feminism is not so modern. It has been going on for over a century now. But take feminism. Feminism, like socialism, explains the history of the world of this struggle between men and women. So women were used and abused, and eventually they began to fall back thanks to feminism. So we will give you the solution. Here's the solution. Everybody comes with a solution. I mean, with these social engineering movements. So Karl Marx came with a solution. The solution is to overthrow capitalism and establish socialism. Hitler came with a solution. The solution is to give me power, I will save you. And they gave him power, and you know how he saved them. And now the feminists, they want power because they will solve the issues. And of course, the environmentalists, they want power because they have a solution. Otherwise, we will die, but if they're in power, we will survive. So it's always like this. Always they start with I remember one author was describing the speeches of Hitler. And this describes so well the speeches of all these social engineers throughout history. So his speeches would typically have 3 parts. So the first part is how bad the situation is. So inflation, starvation, humiliating Versailles Treaty, all that. Then second part, what is the solution? And of course, the solution is always one. There cannot be different solutions. There's only one possible solution. Because it comes to the third part, I'm the only one who could implement this solution. So give me power. So it starts with, there is a problem. Whether this problem is real or imaginary, it doesn't matter. There is a problem. The social engineer always first establishes a problem, and then he comes as a savior. He saves the day. He's the only one who could solve this problem. And of course, he needs to be empowered to solve the problem. That's it.
When you put it like that, it's very simple what they actually do.
Yeah, when you study the history of social engineering, it looks simple because there are certain things that reoccur again and again and again and again.
How old was you when you left Bulgaria?
Oh, I was too old. I was 42 at the time. So I had a very comfortable life in Bulgaria. So I had this vague idea. I didn't like living in Bulgaria, but at the same time, I was well paid. By the way, I'm not an economic migrant. I used to be paid something like 6 times more per hour over there than over here. I actually joke that back in Bulgaria, I had a large property and a small girlfriend, and now I have a large girlfriend and a small property. And my girlfriend is not happy to hear this joke. But actually, my life was very easy over there. My problem was not, I didn't escape from hardship. I worked maybe for 1 or 2 days per week. And the rest of the time I was writing, reading, engaged in my hobbies. But I was increasingly annoyed by everything. So this is like this joke. Have you heard the joke about the difference between the idiot and the neurotic guy? They ask an idiot, how much is 2 plus 2? And he says 5, because he's an idiot. And they ask the neurotic guy, though, how much is 2 plus 2? And he says 4, but he's irritated by this. No, I didn't translate it well. Okay, I failed. So he gives the right answer, but he's not happy with the answer. Anyway, I was increasingly unhappy with everything. I couldn't stand to hear the news because it's the Bulgarian news. It's the same thing. It's like a broken record that goes in circles. Same thing year after year, and the only thing that changes is sometimes the names. the stories are the same. And I couldn't listen to my neighbors anymore. All this talk that the politicians are to blame. It's always that some bad politicians somewhere. We are good people, but they are bad, and this is why Bulgaria has issues. I couldn't stand work in the judiciary anymore. But that's another conversation. The difference with the judiciary over there, between the judiciary over here and the judiciary over there. I was increasingly annoyed by everything, like the neurotic. This is why I thought of this neurotic. Somebody who is nervous. Is the word neurotic? What would be the word for somebody who is nervous and annoyed by everything all the time?
Anxious?
Anxious. Okay. So not neurotic, anxious. So the difference between... Does the joke work now?
Now the joke makes more sense, yeah.
Okay. Okay. The idiot and the anxious person. So eventually I began to argue with people needlessly, to be unpleasant to people. It wasn't working for me, for my peace of mind. I mean, this thing accumulates, this resentment. I was I had mentally immigrated from Bulgaria many years before I actually physically immigrated. For example, I stopped voting in the Bulgarian elections many years before I went to Britain. I mean, there was even an episode when I was already over here at the university over here. And I remember one of my professors told me one day after the lecture, "Oh, by the way, congratulations on your new president." And I was taken aback, and I say, "Thank you." I thought that he was talking about Trump because Trump was just elected. Why my president? Maybe he knew that I prefer Trump to the alternative. Okay. But he was actually talking about the president of Bulgaria. I didn't even know that there had been election in Bulgaria and there is a new president. I didn't know who the president over there was because Trump was my president. Not that I like Trump that much, but he is better than the alternative, like I said. So this is why I migrated. I'm a cultural migrant.
So your book, does it release January next year?
The book could be found on Amazon and in over 15 or more different distributors. It could be found anywhere. It will be widely distributed. It's available for pre-orders, by the way.
Oh, it is. Okay, cool. We'll make sure to keep the link to it in the show notes for all of the shows.
Thank you. It's a very surprising book. One thing that the reaction of all people is they're surprised. And this is what inspired us to write this book. Because although we don't say anything that is really new, that could not be found in some thick university book somewhere, people don't read thick university books. And when they hear that, for example, raising the minimum wage lowers the income of the poor, they're just, what? So, or when we say that Stalin lost World War II because he was prepared too well, they're just taken aback. It doesn't make any sense. How could you be prepared too well and lose because of that? You should win because of that. And Stalin, by the way, lost the war because he wanted to take the whole of Europe. He had to take only Eastern Europe. And stories like this, or how the aid for Africa could be damaging for the Africans. I mean, everybody assumes that if you give somebody money, this somebody will get richer. So if you give two apples, if Johnny has 2 apples and you give Johnny 2 more apples, Johnny will have 7 apples. This is the assumption. But this is not how things work in economics. Actually, it turns out that if you give 2 more apples, Johnny will have less apples at the end of it.
We've seen it in England with the rise of the minimum wage, and It
Yes,
comes from
yes, yes,
easily. Yeah.
yes.
But I guess with your book, you're going against what everyone's learned in school. You're going against what people learn after school when they do more sort of their sort of research. You're going against that a bit, and that's why you're getting a lot of people who are surprised because, first of all, everything you're saying makes sense, and I think that's what's surprising as well because when you explain it, it makes sense, and then people are shocked as in, well, why is this not spoken about more? Definitely with the minimum wage thing, because I still know people now who think the minimum wage should still be increased in England without seeing people who can see right now how crazy the inflation is and how increasing minimum wage doesn't help at all.
Among other things, the inflation is just one of the consequences. There are many more, and they're all bad. And they all lead to one thing: less income for those who are on minimum wage. A lot of things look. History doesn't care about our ideas. History has put it colorfully, metaphorically, its own ideas. And this is why people are so shocked by this Hitler ended racism thing. Actually, that was the last thing he wanted to do. But history didn't care about what he wanted to do. At the end of the day, it matters what you actually achieve. You usually shoot yourself in the foot. That's it. This is what you usually achieve. And the more you do, the worse it gets. It's not like doing more, we should do more. The more we do, the worse we will be. This is the paradoxical.
Well, you can kind of see it, right? With, I know we mentioned it before, with woke culture and them pushing anti-racist agendas it's turned into actually becoming racist. The things that they're pushing. So the whole agenda's just shot the whole movement in the foot because it's just led to racism in the end. The outcome of it is racism.
Yes. And they say, for example, this is why I'm at odds with many conservatives. For example, about Ukraine, they say we should not get our finger in every pie all over the world. And I fully agree. It's not our problem. But unfortunately, we made it our problem back in 1994. So yes, it would have been better not to get involved. It would have been better for us and for the Ukrainians as well if we didn't do anything back in 1994. We started this by our good intentions. Every time we do too much, or Britain giving the war guarantee to Poland before World War II, which was exactly what Stalin wanted with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or Britain getting involved in World War I. By the way, they all share a blame. They all participants in World War I are to blame because they all did too much. If they did less, it would have been better. But everybody's enthusiastic to make things better. It's this enthusiasm that shoots ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, and everyone wants to be involved as well, right?
All right, maybe when the book's released, we'll me and Cam will read it, and then we do a book club. Well, we've not done it for a while, but we have a book club series on the channel. Maybe we'll bring you back on to discuss the book after we've read it.
Yes, thank you.
That'd be good.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, cheers. It's been great. Really, really
Thank you
good.
for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's great to have you on.
Because I could do most of the talking.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure.